Good afternoon to those of you in Georgia or on the East Coast, and good morning to those of you joining from the rest of America. Welcome to today's program, Preserving Holocaust History Through Artifacts, Archives, and Oral History. My name is Robert Tannen, and I'm the Southeast Regional Director for the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Along with my colleague, Dana Mandelbaum, our office works hard every day to bring the experience of the museum and all of its important initiatives outside the walls of the physical institution in Washington, D.C., and into the towns and communities that we serve across the South. Today's conversation, and the second in the series taking place 2 weeks from now, is actually a realization of plans that were more than a year in the making. You see, we had originally scheduled to be in Atlanta in person in April of 2020. We had our partnership set to host collections meetings with survivors and their families. Our airfare was booked, and we were ready to begin promoting. But we all know what happened next. So today, 13 months later, we make good on bringing the museum's work from the National Institute for Holocaust Documentation directly into your living rooms in Atlanta, and due to the power of technology, in many other households across Georgia, the greater Southeast, and other parts of our country. In fact, the force multiplier of social media has participants watching us live right now from 4 continents and many countries, including Portugal, France, Italy, Austria, Venezuela, India, and Australia. Welcome to all of you. On behalf of the museum and me personally, I'm so proud and honored to be co-presenting today's program and our upcoming second program in a few weeks with 2 important Atlanta-based partners, the Bremen Museum and its executive director, Leslie Gordon, and Eternal Life-Hemshech and its longtime president, Karen Lansky Edlin. Before I introduce my friend Karen, a few housekeeping notes. Please keep in mind that this is a live program, so we ask for your forgiveness in advance if there are any technical difficulties. Please use the Q&A function located at the bottom center of your screen to type in your questions at any time throughout the program. Your questions will not appear on the main screen, and the chat function is disabled. We will get to as many of your questions as possible in the allotted time. Also, please note that this gathering is being offered in closed captioning, and if you'd like to utilize that feature, go ahead and press the CC button towards the bottom right of your screen right now. So with that, I'd like to introduce the president of Eternal Life-Hemshech and my friend, Karen Lansky Edlin.
Thank you, Robert. Good afternoon, everyone. I am so honored to be a part of this wonderful program representing the Atlanta community and Eternal Life-Hemshech. Hemshech, a Hebrew word meaning continuation, is an organization that was founded by Holocaust survivors in 1964. Today, we continue their goals of Holocaust remembrance and education. My personal involvement with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum began many decades ago and has continued over the years. As a daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors, I am proud to say that my husband and I have been able to support the amazing work of the museum and the Chappelle Center. Here I am with my husband, and my parents were also there at the grand opening of the museum on that cold, rainy, yet extremely important and momentous day. And my parents, Lola and Reuben Lansky, were also at the groundbreaking of the museum. Today, we are fortunate to have 2 museum experts speak to us. Kyra Schuster is a curator in the National Institute for Holocaust Documentation at the museum and has been on staff since 1994. Her primary role is acquiring new materials for the museum's permanent collection. Noemi Seike Popescu is a program manager in the National Institute for Holocaust Documentation at the museum. Noemi's unique work for the museum focuses on interview production of subjects outside of the United States. She has been on staff since 2007, and she's been a part of its curatorial division for over 10 years. I look forward to learning more about the museum's collection efforts. So with that, please welcome Kyra Schuster to kick us off.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm Kyra Schuster, and I use she, her pronouns. And as mentioned, I've been working at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum for 26 years now. As an acquisitions curator, my primary responsibilities include identifying and acquiring new materials for the museum's permanent collection. And I want to thank everyone for joining us from all across the world today for this long-awaited program. The museum continues to actively collect original artifacts, documents, photographs, films, music, recorded sound, all which date from the time period of Nazi occupation through life in the displaced persons camps, in order to allow us to tell the tragic story of the Holocaust powerfully and authentically. In addition, we also acquire books, unpublished memoirs, home movies, oral testimonies, and music. And we collect from all victims of Nazi persecution, regardless of race, religion, political beliefs, ethnicity, sexual orientation, etc. We also collect materials relating to Americans in the Holocaust, and materials from and documenting witnesses, bystanders, and the perpetrators themselves. The majority of the collections we find are because people have reached out to us. In pre-pandemic times, we would regularly travel domestically, and we have staff based internationally. And after materials are accessioned into our collection, they are ready for cataloging and imaging, and you'll find them in our online catalog, which you can see a screenshot here. Only about 1 to 2% of our collection is actually physically on display at the museum at any given time. The rest is offsite at our Chappelle Family Collections and Conservation Center. This facility will also become our primary research center for the museum, and will also be the primary location of our library, so researchers will be able to view materials out there. My colleagues and I regularly speak and meet with people in order to identify and acquire materials for the museum's collections. As I just mentioned, we collect materials that document all victims of Nazi persecution, as well as materials and testimony from eyewitnesses. And this includes a very large number of men and women who served in the military during World War II. One pair of veterans, who some of you may be familiar with, are identical twin brothers, Howard and Hilbert Margol, who you see here. The Margol brothers enlisted together in the US Army Reserves and were both called up for active duty in April 1943. After participating in the Army Service Training Program, or ASTP, they both wanted to remain in school. And so the brothers were then assigned to different divisions, but they wanted to continue to stay together. So Howard asked his mother to write a letter to the White House, as one does, requesting that they be allowed to serve, and she was successful. The brothers were now both part of Battery B, the 392nd Field Artillery in the 42nd Infantry Division. And 4 months later, on April 29th, 1945, Hilbert and Howard and the 42nd Infantry were part of the troops that liberated the Dachau concentration camp. Over the years, the museum has recorded multiple oral history interviews with both brothers, and Hilbert Margol's testimony is featured in our special exhibition currently up at the museum titled American Witnesses. In addition to donating the letter that their mother received from the White House, Hilbert donated the camera that he used while serving overseas, and Howard donated a sculpture by Lithuanian Jewish artist and Holocaust survivor Yakovich Bunka. In 2019, Allie Allen and her family began the process of donating their family's collection to the museum. Allie, who you see here with her mother, Inga Robbins, Uncle Albert Marks, and cousin Renee Popkin, met with my colleague at her home. After an initial email or phone call, this is really typically the next step, where one of our curators will meet with people, review their materials, and start the important task of recording either the family or the individual's experiences during the Holocaust. And this biographical information not only helps us place materials within the larger context of the Holocaust, but really also provides anybody who views them with a personal connection as to who these people were and what exactly happened to them. This collection primarily documents Allie's great-grandparents, Blanca and Max Hartstein, and her grandparents, Hugh and Paula Marks. Originally from Stuttgart, Hugh and Paula Marks left with their children, Inga and Hans Albert, on November 2nd, 1938, and they went to Switzerland before sailing to the United States on board the SS Washington. The family first settled in Little Rock, Arkansas, before they eventually settled in Atlanta. Allie's great-grandparents were eventually forced out of their home, and in August 1942, they were deported to Terezin, where they remained for over a year before they were then deported to Auschwitz on May 16, 1944. Unfortunately, they did not survive. The letters sent by the Hartsteins to their children start at the end of November 1938 through their time in Terezin. The correspondence also includes efforts by Hugh and Paula to send financial assistance to her parents and to try to get them visas to the United States. But unfortunately, they were not successful in doing so. There are also a number of letters from Paula's sister, Gretel Berger, and her husband and sons, Rolf and Heinz Berger. Although Allie had heard that there were letters, she had actually never seen them. Her grandmother never talked about the Holocaust because she was just so traumatized at having to have left her parents behind. And it wasn't until after Paula Marx passed away that her daughter Inga found the letters stored in an attic. She had all of this material translated, and 11 bound volumes of translations arrived at the museum in August 2019, and those books are now part of the museum's library collection. Allie was actually able to visit the museum in September 2019 as part of our Southeast region's mission trip to Washington. At that time, Allie, who you see here with my colleague Cassandra Laprade-Soita, donated some of the letters from her family's collection, including the postcard her mother wrote while on board the ship coming to America. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, all of our work to bring in and process new materials into the permanent collection has had to come to a complete stop. And so the Hartstein family collection still has not yet fully arrived here in Washington, D.C. Eventually, after we're able to safely reopen and the curators are able to return to work, we will be able to make the necessary arrangements for the remainder of the collection to be safely delivered to the museum, and we'll be able to continue to once again work on cataloging and imaging the entire collection in order to make it fully accessible and available to the public. Allie recently said, quote, "We are in the process of getting everything together, and it will all be housed in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, which gives us a great sense of security. We know that we don't have to worry about everything. It'll be in a climate-controlled building and will be used by historians for years to come. So that gives us a great sense of pride and security. So I want to thank the museum for all of their efforts in working with us." One question that I have been regularly asked since the COVID pandemic closed our doors in March 2020 is the museum still collecting? And the answer to that is a resounding yes. Although we have been physically out of the office since mid-March 2020, my colleagues and I have continued to receive thousands of emails and phone calls from individuals and families across the country who would like to contribute their families' collections to the museum. Prior to the pandemic, the museum would on average receive about 1 to 2 new collections a day, and that's calendar days, not business days. And so far, we have agreed to accept almost over 300 new collections as soon as we are physically able to do so. Since we are currently unable to travel and meet with people face-to-face during this time, we've adjusted our methods, and we've been meeting with a lot of people by phone or by video conferencing. One woman who reached out to me was Andrea Carden. Andrea had found a letter among her grandparents' papers. She didn't know anything about the author or even why her family had this letter, only that it was incredibly moving and she really felt it belonged to the Holocaust Museum. So Andrea sent me an email and then sent me a scan of this letter, and I too was immediately moved by it. The letter, which you can see here and hopefully you could read, is typed and it's in English, and it was written by a woman named Fruma Bruda and dated August 20th, 1944, just weeks after her liberation. My first course of action was to identify the author. I mean, I knew her name, but what information could I find out about her? So I started with the museum's Holocaust Survivors and Victims Resource Center database. Using their names database, I conducted multiple searches using variant spellings of Fruma's first name and last name. I discovered a record for a Fruma Brauda, aka Gervitz, who also happened to be from Kovno. And then I do what most everybody else can do from their home. I turn to Google. And that Google provided me with links to multiple articles from Lithuania, which included an article about the grandchildren of a, quote, well-known pediatrician Fruma Gervitz, end quote, who visited Lithuania from Israel. With the help of my colleague Ina Novozelskis, who you'll meet in the next program, we were able to identify the names of the men and women who helped save Fruma during the Holocaust. This then led me to Yad Vashem's website, where I was able to search their online collections and databases. I not only found images of Fruma and her husband, who did not survive the Holocaust, but I found information about her rescuers who were recognized as righteous among the nations. I was also led to the website for the Ghetto Fighters House Museum in Israel and found materials within their online collections about Fruma and her rescuers as well. Most importantly, the research I was able to do within the holdings of these other institutions led me right back to the USHMM. In her letter, Fruma lists the names of various children who had been placed in hiding, who she was now trying to find, or who she knew had survived. And one of those children, Rena Gilda, now Rubenstein, had previously donated her collection of family photographs to the Holocaust Museum in 2004. After the museum's collection staff resumes operations, we'll be able to complete the digitization and cataloging of Rena's photos. And after Fruma's letter arrives at the museum, we'll be able to catalog it as well and connect the dots between the two collections. Another collection that has resulted in multiple dots being connected is a short 3-minute film clip, which documents the liberation of the Vittel internment camp in France. And this story starts, as many online do, on Google with a simple Google search. Private First Class Eldon Nicholas, who you see here, was an ambulance driver with the US Army's 548th Medical Ambulance Company. They were part of the troops that arrived in Vittel immediately after the camp was liberated. Eldon never spoke much about his experiences during the war, and so in 2008, his son Donald took to Google to see what he could find about some of the places mentioned in his dad's wartime materials. The very first thing Donald found was the catalog record on the museum's website for a March of Time newsreel outtakes documenting Vittel after liberation. The camp primarily held foreign nationals who the Germans were planning to use for civilian prisoner exchanges. And the internees of Vittel did not have to perform forced labor. And there was one transfer out of the camp to Auschwitz. Donald sat down at his home computer, reading about Vittel on the museum's website, and then started to watch the short, silent newsreel outtakes. About 2 minutes into the film footage, he sees this. A large crowd of women and children are watching in delight as an American soldier entertains the children with a puppet. The children are smiling and laughing and trying to grab the puppet. They're like the cutest things ever. And in the last shot of the film, the soldier sits on his Jeep surrounded by a mountain of children, all waving flags and laughing. Donald recognized his father as that GI almost immediately. He sat on the information for 24 hours, not even telling his wife or family, before he called the museum and I was put in touch with him. Of course, when we spoke, the first thing I asked about was the puppet. And he responded, "Oh, that ratty old thing. Yeah, that's still in Dad's army trunk," along with a number of other materials that his father had saved. Just 6 months later, on Memorial Day weekend, Donald and his brother Greg, along with their wives and children, came to the museum to donate the puppet along with some of the other items you see here. I've always particularly loved the letter he wrote because Eldon writes to his parents about all the excitement that day with a war correspondent, and they'll know it when they see it. This collection is an excellent example of having very good provenance, or we know the history of the items. We know that Eldon used this puppet in Vittel. It's well documented between the film and his letters and the photographs and newspaper clippings. But because he never spoke with his family about it, we don't know who made the puppet or whose initials are written on the back of it, or even how he came to acquire it while in camp. And this is why we're regularly and continually encouraging people to document this information while they are still able to do so. We very much understand that parting with such precious family materials can be a very, very emotional decision, and it's not always an easy one. But we encourage people to document this information so that when the time comes that they're no longer able to tell their own story themselves, that information will have been captured and recorded for posterity. 4 years after Kiki the monkey puppet became part of our collection, the museum celebrated our 20th anniversary with a national tour. During one of our tour stops, I met a woman named Edie Frankel, who was a child survivor of multiple camps in the Netherlands and France. Edie was just 6 weeks old when her family was denounced and sent to the Westerbork transit camp. Because Edie's mother, Helen, had American citizenship, the entire family was sent to Vittel, where they were eventually liberated. Of course, when I met with her, I started to tell her about Eldon and the puppet. And we sat down at her home computer and I pulled up the film clip I just showed you. Because Edie was born shortly before their deportation, she does not appear in any of the family's pre-war photographs. And the earliest known photo she has of herself is in the newspaper clipping you see here, which was taken for their local newspaper celebrating Edie's 3rd birthday here in the United States, or her first birthday in freedom. As soon as we saw the crowd of women and children in the film footage, I remarked that the toddler with the blonde curly hair at the front of the crowd had a very similar hairstyle to Edie as appears in her birthday picture. But I recognized that was the style back then. And as soon as the camera turned around and showed the faces of the children, I immediately recognized Edie and exclaimed, "Oh my God, that's you." And at the same time, she's like, "Oh my God, that's my mother." And we found her sister Hannah in the following shot. And needless to say, there were a lot of excited phone calls that followed afterwards. A few months later, when the museum's 20th anniversary tour returned back to Washington, I hosted a reunion between the two families, and here you see Donald, Greg, and Edie with the puppet. They actually all still keep in touch with each other, and they told me at the time their families have both now doubled in size. And looking back through the many years I have worked at the museum, my favorite moments are always the days when I get to connect the dots. To be able to reconnect someone with a piece of their own past is absolutely an amazing feeling. And to be responsible for caring for their family's materials is an awesome responsibility. And this is why I always think of the museum's collection as a jigsaw puzzle that has no border to it. Each new addition, whether it's a single item or a large collection, adds yet another piece of information and another piece of the puzzle. So when paired with materials from the same family, town, country, camp, ghetto, or even experience, it helps add to the larger picture and really expands our knowledge of what occurred. We never know when the next collection will help us learn something new about a collection we already have or a collection we'll get in the future. An important piece of this puzzle is making sure that we continue to collect from a wide variety of perspectives, including those of witnesses, perpetrators, and bystanders. I will now turn the floor over to my colleague, Noemi Seke-Popescu, who will speak about the important work she does to acquire those testimonies. Noemi?
Thanks, Kyra. I'm Noemi Seke-Popescu, and I work on oral histories at the museum's Jeff and Toby Herr Oral History Archive. Before I get into specifics, let me give you a little situating info about who we are. For over 30 years, we have been collecting and producing oral history interviews. In this time, we've built one of the world's largest and most diverse collections of oral testimony on the Holocaust. We present stories of Jewish survivors, of course, concentration camp liberators, rescuers, relief workers, and also members of social, political, and religious groups who were targeted by the Nazis and their collaborators. These categories of oral histories about the Holocaust, these survivor interviews, the resistance fighters, the interviews with rescuers or post-war prosecutors, these are all types of interviews that many of you may already be familiar with. Here at the museum, we have another more unusual category of documentation, that of a group we call witnesses. This category denotes what you might term an onlooker or a bystander. So who are these witnesses? I have a general definition that goes something like this. A witness denotes anyone who lived through the 1930s or 1940s and can describe the political or social or cultural environment of those years, which includes, but is not limited to, Jewish persecution. So think neighbors, acquaintances, schoolmates, and even passersby, the people who might have witnessed just one event on just one day. These witness interviews frequently serve not only as corroboration of what the victims and survivors have already reported, they also add an essential dimension to understanding the Holocaust. In other words, we take a holistic approach to documentation, and we aim to capture voices at all levels of society and to document experiences from all walks of life. We currently have over 2,800 such witness testimonies in our collection from across Europe and beyond. We have interviews with witnesses from as far away in the West, in your mind's eye, the global map, as far away in the West as Northern Ireland in the East, and Northern Ireland in the West, obviously, and India in the East, passing through such places as Italy or Albania. So Northern Ireland to India, passing through Italy and Albania. Let's just ponder those examples for a moment. Northern Ireland, there were no deportations there. Why would the Holocaust Museum document wartime activities as they relate to the Holocaust in Northern Ireland? Well, there was wartime rescue in Britain, encompassing multiple programs to bring Jews from the continent to the British Isles. And some of the wartime Jewish refugees ended up being resettled in Northern Ireland during the war. So we wanted to know, what is it like for a small town in Northern Ireland to integrate Jewish refugees who didn't speak their language and who in many cases were minors? They were children who had been traumatized, being torn away from their families. We talked to some of the locals and they overwhelmingly shared warm and positive stories with us, which, and this is crucial, were echoed by the Jewish survivors who had been resettled to Northern Ireland at that time and whom we later found scattered throughout the world. I also mentioned Italy and Albania. In that part of the world, we are hard at work documenting complex, multi-layered stories. These stories revolve around human smuggling and heroism, as well as betrayal, in small mountain communities. When we are really lucky, we find communities that still have dozens of inhabitants who are now in their late 80s or late 90s even, and who can really reconstruct what happened during the Holocaust at this very local level. In Italy, we seek to gather documentation about villages that served as spaces of internment where foreign Jews, non-Italian Jews, were forcibly kept for several years. In Albania, and in the Balkans more generally, we are trying to reconstruct smuggling networks which aided fleeing Jews in their search for safe haven. Here too, we are trying to seek out the memories of the survivors who passed through these same mountain communities. And in counter-distinction to what we learned in Northern Ireland, I would say that there is much more divergence between the memories of the local witnesses in Eastern and Central Europe and the memories of Jewish survivors in Eastern and Central Europe. I also mentioned India. There we found witnesses in Hyderabad and Calcutta. This project was a little unusual in that our witnesses were Jews themselves. They were Baghdadi Jews who gave us bystander testimony about the European Jews who had fled the Nazi Reich and found themselves interned in India, in British India, as enemy aliens during the war. 15 years ago, we would have been talking to people who were adults when they witnessed these events. Today, we mostly talk to people who were children at the time. But children's memories can yield a lot of historical data. We still find witnesses who were lookouts, either working directly for a local resistance group in Italy, or doing a favor to a family member who was involved in rescue in France. Sometimes we talk to witnesses who were reckless, very young men at the time of the war, who were skirting legality and contributing to the smuggling effort at ages 14 or 15 in the Balkans. Some of these people are still with us today, and we really do make it a top priority to try to reach them and talk to them and record their memories. So how do we find these witnesses? Our approach typically varies from location to location. Local customs and the environment yield different outcomes. For example, and now I'm going to speak very generally, it is easier to find witnesses in Eastern Europe than it is to find witnesses in Western Europe. The memories of men and women will diverge owing to their different roles in traditional societies. For example, men will have witnessed far more activities which happened outdoors than women, and therefore, they are more likely to give us testimony about violent episodes. Typically, women cannot recall violent episodes. They were inside the home. In the time that we have left, I'd like to circle back to Lithuania, since Kyra referenced an example of a Jewish survivor story from that country. In Lithuania, there had been a good amount of documentation available to researchers about the Holocaust as it happened in Lithuanian cities and larger towns. However, there was less evidence available from smaller locales, from villages or rural areas. Many of these smaller Jewish communities had been completely wiped out during the war. Without witness testimony, we would have less evidence about this particular history. So when it came to Lithuania, how did we go about finding our witnesses? Many people in this part of the world remained in the towns in which they grew up, and local networks or village networks are still very strong. So we work with local contacts. And I will share a bit of insider info. Librarians are always your friends. Find a great local librarian and they will tell you everything you need to know. Aside from local librarians, we sometimes work with a helpful post office staff person, or maybe a local priest who knows the older people in the community. Typically, local teachers are very helpful, especially the teachers who are personally invested in preserving the stories of their own regions. Whenever we embark on one of these documenting trips, these interview trips, and go into the field, we know that spontaneity is going to be key. Some of the people we find do not have a street address. They do not have a phone. And I don't even mean a cell phone. They don't have a landline. So we cannot be in contact with them until we actually visit them in their remote village. So when we set out on a new documentation project, we really have no way of knowing how much we will find, and even sometimes where we're going to be sleeping by the end of the day. So to put it simply, we just go wherever the story takes us. Let's look at a few examples of interviews we produced in Lithuania with these witnesses, these bystanders. Our first case, our first Lithuanian witness, is Stasė Dauksienė. In the clip you're about to see, she talks about how the Jewish population was perceived in her hometown of Ilakai and her father's activities during the war. To put it in context, Ilakai, this place where she lived and she still lived during the interview, was a site of mass murder. Before we play the clip, just a little heads up, you will be viewing these interview clips in their original language, in this case in Lithuanian, and we will be providing English language captions.
Tai man atrodo, kad žiauresnio įvykio negalėjau aš gyvenime matyti. Ir savo sakydavau, jeigu šitai bebūtų, aš niekad neičiau pasižiūrėti šitokių akimirkų baisių, tokių baisių vaizdų, kurie sukrėtė mūsų visus ilakiškius. Nes jų gyventojai bendravo su žydais, turėjo artimus ryšius ir žydai nebuvo tokie, kaip čia pasakius, nepasitikintis, skūpus. Jeigu nueidavo į parduotuvę, tai visada galėjo Benijošienė valgydavo su dukrelė vienam kambarį ir sakydavo, pasirinkit, ką norit. Aš greitai išeisiu ir susitvarkysim. O jeigu mūsų žmonės neturėdavo kartais pinigų sumokėti, tai pilnai duodavo, kaip sakydavom, embargos. Ir paskui turi, atnešk, atiduosi. Nežinoju, kad mūsų tų valstiečių ir tų žmonių gyvenimas nebuvo toks perteklingas, kad galėtų viską laisvai nusipirkti. Todėl ir tie ryšiai buvo gana tokie normalūs. Nu, po to, kada jau žydai buvo sušaudyti, tai prasidėjo turto dalybos. Tie daugiausiai, kas šaudė, kas juos naikino, tai ir stengėsi pasiimti visą tai, kas liko. Ir pastatus, ir gyvulius. Ir taip pat, matyt, buvo sekama ir žinojo, kur žydai savo turtą išvežė. Prisimenu, atėjo pas tėvelį ir paklausė Budrikį, kur padėjo įmykį turtą. Sako, eikit į Rugius, yra jo vežimas ir ten viskas yra sukrauta. O vežimas buvo pilnas su didžiausių kaupų pridėtas drabužių. Nu ir tėvelis taip viską pasakė, arklys buvo pririštas, pasiėmė arklį, pasikinkė, pasiėmė karvę, viską įsivedė, taip darė su visais, pas kuriuos buvo padėta to, reiškia, žydų turto. O kita, aišku, dalinosi irgi ne tie vargšai, o tie, kurie juos sunaikino. Tai tokie mano prisiminimai iš tų baisių tokių laikų.
This excerpt gives you a pretty good sense of a lot of our material, especially from Lithuania and the surrounding countries. We talked to people like Stasė Dauksienė, the person you just saw, in order to get a real feeling about what the world looked like at the time that these mass murders were taking place. Another good example is the testimony given to us by Regina Prudnikova in our next clip. She describes what happened in her hometown of Pilvisky, including the roundups of Jews, looting, and local auctions. At the end of this next clip, she also shares a story that happened to her.
Atvežė čia daug ką.
Oi, čia buvo ir varžytinės, ir pirkų, ir draskė, vežėsi.
Jūs varžytinės matėte?
Jo, ir per langus mėtė, griebė, kas ką pagavo, žinokit, o Jėzus, kas čia darėsi. To Lipkės restoranas, tai buvo pilnas, prikrautas tų iš visų surinkta drabužiai, žinot, suvežė jau tenai arkliais, tai va Jėzus, kas darėsi, žinokit, baisu.
Tai tos varžytinės buvo prie Lipkės restorano?
Jo, taip. O kitur tai per langus, patalinės paduškas, mėtė kaldras, patalų, žinokit, tai per langus, mėtė į gatvę, žmonės griebė. Iš kaimų suvažiavę buvo. Nu tai šitie visi, kurie dalyvavo šaudyme, šitie visi ir mėtė. Visi. Kur geresnius kabaldus, te viską pasiliko, žinot, kur suėjo ant to turtų gyventi.
Tai jūs, kai užeidavot, jūs matydavot, kad žydų baldai stovi?
Nu, aš atėjau, tik žinau, kad jie nieko neturėjo, bagai buvo, klausykit, nieko, o krakolinį paltą, tai kur reikėjo, kiek kainavo krakolinis paltas, šitą žmona to Kozlovo apsivilkos, tai kur jūs girdėjot? Sakau, į batų buvo privaryta krūva baisiausia, tai aš vienus paėmiau, tai pastebėjau ir atsivijau, atėmė iš mane.
Kas atsivijo?
O ta uošvienį to Kozlovos, o pusbrolių mano.
O tai krūva buvo kur suversta batų?
Suversta kalidoriui. Kalidoriui. Netoks kalidorius didelis buvo, taip kaip pusė šitų kambarių, žinokit. Ir aš įėjau pas juosius, o paskiau išeidama pasimiau tokius burdavus zomčinius batukus. Na jau, tai jau pasižiūrėjau, kad jau nėra kaip aš išėjau, tai atbėgo ir atėmė iš manęs.
Tai ką jinai sakė, kai atiminė?
Sakė, atiduok, paėmė mus. Sakau, čia ne tavo, bet žydų.
A jinai ką sakė?
Atidavė, nieko.
I find this testimony to be particularly interesting. It illustrates what it was like for a teenage girl to interact with looted goods and to confront looters in her own family. And that family member, that cousin of hers who costs her for taking the pair of suede shoes, and she says, "Give it back, that's ours." And then our interviewee says, she responds, "They aren't yours, they belong to the Jews." And you can see that she feels very conflicted just recalling that story to us. Finally, I would like to share with you the testimony of Leonas Stankus. He's a perpetrator. In this last clip, he describes his participation in a mass shooting that took place in Belarus in 1943. As a warning, some of this material will be difficult.
Leonai, tai dabar jūs papasakokit, kaip jūs šovėt? Atėjo jūsų eilė, reiškia, jūs sakot, kad iš eilės rinkdavo tos kareivius, taip? Nu ir kaip buvo, kai atėjo jūsų eilė?
Aš šovėjau į kairį pusę, čia, į tą daiktą. Nu ir jis, matai, nekrito už ką. Sak lenkis. Palauk, kad tas puskarininkas šalia man stovėjo, tai tas pylė ant tą šūvį jam. Štai į nugarą. Ir staigiai krito.
Kas ant šaudė?
Ten visi ponai, mūsų visi karininkai buvo. Tai visi, vyresni puskarininkai visi. Visi buvo ten dalykai.
Ir ką darė karininkai?
Nu, karininkus pirmų šūvius davė. Visi karininkai. Jo.
Nu, paskui po karo jūs auginot vaikus, dukterį, sūnų auginot. Ar jūs jam pasakodavot apie tą šaudimą, kad jūs nušovėte?
Pasakoja, nu į viską.
Kaip jūs pasakojat vaikams?
Nu, sakiau, kad buvo tokie kariuomeniai. Nu, teko. Buvo tokios skaudžios nelaimės, kuriai šaudimas žydų tautybės. Teko ir man ten būti.
Ir šaudyt prisimti?
Sakau, teko vieną peršauti. Nu, ką vaiką pasiklaus, ką jie. gali sakyti. O sako, kodėl tėveli buvai ten į tą kariuomenę? Sako, todėl, kad aš neturėjau namų, neturėjau kur gyventi. Aš turėjau eiti į kariuomenę. Aš neėjau, kad specialiai, kad žydų šaudyti. Su Lietuvos savanoriu. Batalionas ir viskas, nu Lietuvos saugai, jeigu ne tokius darbus dirbti. O jeigu vyriausybė tą padarė, tai čia vyriausybė kalčiausiai.
A difficult but personally and psychologically revealing excerpt from our collection. Our work continues. We are currently active across Europe, trying to get as many witnesses as we can to share their stories with us while they are still with us. And with that, I would like to thank you for being here today. And I would like to invite Kyra and Robert back into the virtual space to join me in answering your questions.
Thank you so much, Noemi. Certainly your presentation and the clips that you showed and the work that you're doing, it really displays the fact that the museum really is a global institution, collecting all aspects of this history. And Kyra, thank you so much for those examples. And it's nice to see the Atlanta examples as well, and the breadth and depth of what you collect. There's been a lot of questions that have come in the chat and some comments. So let's just get right into it. And Noemi, if you're okay with it, we'd like to go right back to you with the first one. The question is, how did the pandemic, and especially the global travel restrictions that are still ongoing in many cases, certainly in Europe and other places, how did that affect your ability to do your job?
That's a great and also complicated question. So we actually did keep producing throughout the pandemic. We pivoted really quickly back in March of 2020 to online. We started doing remote interviews. And for those regions that I had referenced in the presentation, the regions that are economically depressed, where there isn't much infrastructure, a lot of people don't have internet. Of course, they do not have computers. Most of them don't even have phones sometimes. So what we had to do was get in place a network of people who could send cell phones to a certain person in order to have an audio recording of their story. Now, because cell phones in Europe are no longer compatible in many regions with what we were trying to do, we actually had to go back and find cell phones from 5 to 7 years ago that had the right technology. And then we would get them passed along this route, sometimes over multiple borders. So it's been an interesting year.
Thank you, Noemi. And actually, someone just wrote it right now, Sarah, since I have you on the screen before we move to Kyra, she's writing that I'm fascinated by the recording of oral histories. Who comprises the crew that actually records these testimonies? And do the staff need to speak a variety of languages, or is there a translator available? How does all that work?
Great question. So I would say it varies from place to place. We try to keep our crews or our teams to an absolute minimum, because what we're trying to do is get people to candidly express something that they lived through. And although they are not the victims, they are going to be talking about violent episodes that may have marked them deeply, that may implicate them. And you don't want 15 people standing around with like lights and camera and action. They are never going to tell you anything. So rule of thumb is, if you can keep it to one person, maybe 2 people, that's the way to go. On the language front, we always work with native speakers. And so in each country, we're working with someone who speaks that language fluently.
Thank you, very helpful. So Kyra, if we can, we're going to go to you now. And there's been a lot of questions for you, so that's a positive. If you're okay with it, I'm going to bring 3 of them from 3 different participants together, since they're all somewhat linked, and hopefully you can tackle them one at a time. So the first one came from Daron, and he writes, do we accept only original artifacts, or do we also take copies as well? That's one. The second one is from Tina. She's asking, what would be a reason as to why a donation may be rejected, aside from it obviously not being authentic? And then the third one is from John, and he's stating that he sees the importance of tying together the threads of a story that links artifacts, people, and history, will the museum keep collections donors informed with updates as the unfolding story of their artifacts are potentially linked to other threads? So I hope you got all three of those, and I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, start with the last question first, because I think it's the easiest answer as far as keeping collections donors apprised if we're able to connect dots with other collections that come on down the road. We always do our best, assuming we can still get in touch with that survivor, that donor family, that individual, then absolutely we will let them know. I always tell people, and they always laugh at me, that nobody tells the Holocaust Museum when they're moving to a new address, right? You think of your subscriptions, your credit card bills, tax bills, things like that. Nobody thinks of us. So assuming we have updated contact information and we know where to find you, 100%, we love, as I mentioned, we love to be able to make those connections. And if we can do that and tell you about it, then we do our best. Reasons why, first question was, are we prefer to collect originals? We do prefer to collect original materials rather than copies. Again, it would depend on what the materials are. Well, certainly we take a look at everything. If you have a self-recorded testimony, certainly maybe getting a digital copy is a better way to go. It's a better format, as opposed to photocopies of original documents. Sometimes those documents exist in other archives and people want to offer us photocopies or printouts from that archive. And in that case, we may already have access to that material. Reasons that we say no, thank you. The majority of that is simply because it's outside of our collecting scope. We get a lot of offers from families of veterans who brought souvenirs home from the war, or materials that are much more focused or solely focused on World War II and the military history, whereas we're focused primarily on the Holocaust. It is a fine line. There is some overlap, but I would say that's really the primary reason we would say no, thank you. And we do always try to offer suggestions of other institutions that someone can contact. These materials all do have historic value. We just may not be the right repository for it. Right? Yeah, I think I got all three.
Yes, you got all three. Thank you. And actually, Joseph also wrote in to thank the museum, to thank you and your colleagues, Kyra and Noemi, for preserving and digitizing the collection donation that he made to our institution, which actually consisted of his father's letters of correspondence between his dad and his dad's parents in Vienna. So he thanks us for that. And Kyra, one of our participants wrote in and they caught in your intro that you've been with the museum for 26 years, which knowing the history and the dates, it's nearly the entire existence since we've opened to the public in 1993. So their question for you is actually a serious one. Isn't it hard dealing with such difficult stories day in, day out, year after year? What keeps you going?
Well, certainly it can be. There's certainly, it's the Holocaust. We're dealing with genocide on a daily basis. But for me, what I really love about my job, what I've always loved about my job, and I'll tell anybody who asks, is it's every day is a new adventure. I never know who's going to call or email or what they're going to have. Some of the most amazing materials I've been able to acquire for the museum's collection have started with somebody cold calling the museum. I never would have thought to look for this item in a million years until they called me. And I was like, oh, yeah, of course we want that. I get to meet the most incredible people. I love working with the survivors and their families, but especially I have a special spot in my heart for the World War II veterans and their families that I've worked with over the years. So I really do get to meet the most amazing people with the most incredible stories. And I love the fact that my job takes me around the world in a day. I can sit at my desk in the morning and talk about or be researching Lithuania and end up on France and then end up in Atlanta and then end up in Cuba. And then I'm right back in Germany. And, I get to learn. I remember when I first started the job and I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, my first job, big job out of college. And I thought I knew everything about the Holocaust. And I very quickly realized I don't even know the tip of the iceberg. And so the fact that 26 years later, I can still learn something new every day is just an incredible gift. And again, I like to joke, I'm kind of a professional yenta, right? I get to go to people's homes or meet with people online and talk to them, ask them all these personal questions, learn all about their stories, and then acquire their materials and write that all down and tell the world about it. And it's, as I mentioned, it's really an awesome responsibility to to care for these materials, to be responsible for their family's legacy and history when they're no longer able to tell their stories. And yeah, I am very grateful every day that I get to do what I do, and with the people I get to do it with too.
That's amazing. Kyra and Noemi, it certainly is sacred, the work that you're doing, and thank you for what you do. And this last one is actually for both of you, but Noemi, if you'll go first. Why do we keep collecting? You know, the Holocaust is, many of us know, the most documented genocide in world history. Don't we have enough materials and stories to prove the Holocaust deniers wrong? Why do we keep doing this work?
That's a really good question. So there is a lot of documentation on certain aspects of the Holocaust, but there is actually very little documentation on other aspects. So for instance, the Jews that were killed in hiding or during an escape from a concentration camp, or even, as I mentioned, in Lithuania and that part of the world, all of those communities in the East that had been completely wiped out, no survivors, no documentation. There's also tens of thousands who died during the very last months of the war in death marches. No information on them. So I would say that the information that we have in certain cases, not overall, in certain cases, is partial at best or completely missing at times. And the only people right now in those kind of black hole areas that can give us clues about how the victims died, or even sometimes who the victims were, are the people who are still alive. And that's why we have to talk to them and we have to collect from them. Kyra likes to say something about a jigsaw puzzle. I've been thinking about this. So the way I see what we do is not a jigsaw puzzle, but a pixelated picture. So I think our work is zooming into the pixelated picture and seeing where the pixels end, and then figuring out those gaps and asking people to give us more pixels to create an ever clearer picture.
That works. I like that. I'll integrate that into my analogy. From my perspective, it is someone who works with objects and documents and photos and things like that. It's, we never know where the next piece of information is going to come from. And even what the museum knew and what we presented in our permanent exhibition when we first opened our doors in 1993, we know so much more. So much research and scholarship has been done since then, which is why we're in the process of now updating and refreshing our permanent exhibition. And who knows what we don't know yet, right? So every new collection, every family has their own story, and they may have that small piece of missing information or a new detail. I mean, I remember years ago, there was a collection of photos that were very well known to my colleagues and I, and we had seen multiple copies all over from various sources, but we never really knew the history of them before. And it wasn't until somebody came forward and said, oh, here's the rest of the series of those photographs, and this is who took them, and these are the people who are in them. And it was just like, all of a sudden we had all this information because one person sent us an email and shared his testimony and experience with us. And things like that. It's just the reason we keep collecting is because there's still so much to learn. And I think because the Holocaust was literally a global event, it didn't just happen in Europe, it happened all around the world, I always say, except for Antarctica. And so there is so much that is still out there that is not yet discovered that people don't know. And honestly, I don't know if we'll ever know everything about it. So if we can keep collecting and learning and interviewing and sharing, that's really the only way that we can learn from the tragedy of the Holocaust and what happened.
Well said by both of you. And that's really a great way to start to kind of bring us to a close for today's programs. And I want to thank everyone for your great questions. If we weren't able to address yours today, rest assured, no worries. We'll reach out to you directly in the coming days. I'd like to now take this opportunity to thank my good friend, Karen Lansky Edlin, and her organization, Eternal Life-Hemshech, and of course, Leslie Gordon, the entire staff, and the great work that they do at the Bremen Museum in Atlanta for partnering with us on today's conversation. And while I'd also be remiss if I didn't thank my esteemed colleagues again, Kyra Schuster and Noemi Seke-Popescu, and the museum's team behind the scenes who ensured that today's program ran smoothly. And of course, a very special thanks to you, the audience, for participating today. Please note, this is important, that there will be a survey sent out to everyone on today's call within the next day or so. And please be sure to fill it out and let us know your feedback. It's super helpful. Also included in that survey is an opportunity for you to provide us your contact information in order to make an appointment to speak with the curator if you have collections that you would like to consider donating to the museum. And as you heard from both Kyra and Noemi, we continue to collect these items about the world in order to keep finding those missing puzzle pieces. They're all over, and we need to get more of them and keep bringing that puzzle together. I'd like to invite you to join us for our next program of this two-part series, Preserving Holocaust History, Collecting Oral Testimonies and Researching Family Fates, taking place exactly 2 weeks from today on Thursday, May 27th, 2021 at noon. Everyone will be receiving an e-invitation to register for that program as well. Now, before we close, I want you all to know that the work of the museum and all that you heard today from my colleagues and our efforts to rescue the evidence, our urgent efforts, only happens with private philanthropic support. This is even more pressing and urgent due to the challenges we have all worked through throughout the pandemic. If you'd like to consider making a gift to the National Institute for Holocaust Documentation Impact Fund, which will directly support the efforts that you heard about today, please feel free to reach out to me at the email address you see on the screen, southeast@ushmm.org. Thank you all again for joining us today. And remember, what you do matters. Take care and stay safe.